I was standing in the boardroom of Belmont Capital Holdings, dressed in a worn blazer I had borrowed from a friend, my shoes still damp from the thunderstorm that had soaked me on my way there. The air inside was thick with expensive perfume, money, and undisguised disdain. All eyes were on me. Chelsea Voss, the smug COO with her crystal flute of champagne raised in mockery. Nathaniel Drake, the white firm's corporate lawyer who smirked like he already owned the empire, and Robert Finch, my aunt's former golden boy and self-appointed heir to her legacy. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't a Belmont, not in the way they were, but I was Victoria Belmont's blood niece, her only living relative, and I had just completed the impossible condition of her will: survive, completely penniless, for 30 days in her abandoned penthouse on the Upper East Side. They thought I'd give up. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd crack on day 3, but I didn't. And now, standing before them, filthy, hungry, exhausted, but unbowed, I held the envelope that would change everything. Inside wasn't just the updated will. Inside was the truth about Victoria, and what she had left behind not for them, but for me. The memory of how this all began washed over me as I stood there, facing their expectant smirks. 5 weeks ago, I was living in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn, painting portraits of strangers' pets to pay rent and tutoring art students on Zoom. I hadn't spoken to my Aunt Victoria in over 5 years, not since I left business school to pursue art. She'd called me soft, delusional, and unfit to carry the Belmont name. So when her personal lawyer, Mr. Winters, showed up at my building on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. Victoria had died. Heart attack, sudden and silent at her desk, just like she always said she wanted to go. "Ms. Harper," Mr. Winters had said, standing awkwardly in my paint-splattered living room, "your aunt has left a will with one condition, an unusual one." He adjusted his glasses and read directly from the document. "To inherit my entire portfolio, stocks, properties, accounts, and assets, Harper must survive 30 consecutive days, with no money, no phone, and no outside contact, inside my Upper East Side penthouse. If she quits or fails, the empire transfers to my executive board, under equal distribution." I nearly choked on my tea. "This is a joke, right?" "Ms. Belmont was not known for her humor," Mr. Winters replied dryly. "Her shareholders have agreed to monitor your progress. Weekly check-ins. You will be watched." "That place has been abandoned for 20 years, I said. "After Uncle William died, she swore she'd never go back." "Precisely," Mr. Winters nodded. "No one has entered since 2003. "And if I refuse? Then everything goes to the board, effective immediately." I stared out my window at the Brooklyn skyline, thinking of all the times Victoria had told me I was too soft for the real world, how I'd never survive without her connections, how disappointed she was when I left Wharton. "When do I start?" I asked. The next morning, Chelsea, Nathaniel, and Robert were waiting outside the building on 5th Avenue, a grand pre-war building that had once been the crown jewel of Victoria's real estate holdings. "Look who decided to show up," Chelsea sneered, her red-bottomed shoes clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. "Victoria's charity case." "Harper," Nathaniel nodded, "all business. The terms are simple. No money, no phone, no visitors, no deliveries. You stay for 30 days or you forfeit everything." Robert just laughed. "She won't last 3 days in that dump." The elevator didn't work. I climbed 12 flights of stairs carrying only a backpack with some clothes and toiletries, the only personal items I was allowed to bring. No food, no water, no electronics. When Robert unlocked the door to Penthouse A, dust billowed out like a ghost exhaling. The smell of abandonment, that distinct mix of mildew, old paper, and forgotten dreams, hit me immediately. "Home sweet home," Chelsea smirked, taking my phone and wallet. "See you in a week, if you're still here." The door closed behind them, and I heard the deadbolt turn. I was alone in the dark, cavernous space that had once been Victoria Belmont's pride and joy, now a luxury prison rotting in silence. No electricity, no running water, dust, mold, and broken glass everywhere. Sheets draped over furniture like specters, windows sealed shut, the view of Central Park obscured by 2 decades of grime. I collapsed onto a bare mattress in what must have been the master bedroom, exhaustion overtaking me. As darkness fell, I couldn't help but wonder if this was Victoria's final revenge, a last lesson in humility for the niece who had dared to choose art over finance. What I didn't know then was that it wasn't revenge at all. It was a test. and not the kind I expected. The first 3 days were brutal. I drank melted ice from the broken freezer. I rationed old canned food I found in a kitchen cabinet, beans and soup that had expired years ago, but hadn't yet bloated their containers. I slept beneath dusty velvet curtains because there were no sheets on the beds. Every inch of the place seemed to whisper, "Leave." The penthouse was massive, over 5,000 square feet of decaying luxury. 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a library, a formal dining room, and spaces whose purposes I couldn't even determine in the dim light that filtered through the grimy windows. On day 4, as I was attempting to wash my face with water I'd collected in an old crystal vase, I heard something fall in what appeared to be Victoria's bedroom. A heavy thud, like a book hitting the floor. I froze. Was someone else here? Had one of them come back to torment me? Heart racing, I crept toward the sound, wielding a fireplace poker I'd found in the living room. The master bedroom was the one room I'd avoided sleeping in. It felt too personal, too much like invading Victoria's space even though she hadn't been there in decades. There was no one there, just a vintage brass floor lamp that had somehow toppled over, its heavy base now cracked open on the parquet floor. I bent down to examine it, and that's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper that had been hidden inside the lamp's hollow base. With trembling fingers, I unfolded what appeared to be a letter written in Victoria's unmistakable sharp slanted handwriting. "Harper, if you've found this, you're stronger than I thought. You are now inside my most sacred space. But to claim it, you must understand me first. Begin in the studio. Follow the colors. Find me." Studio? What studio? Victoria wasn't an artist. She was a ruthless investment banker who had built Belmont Capital from nothing into a Wall Street powerhouse. I spent the rest of the day searching for anything resembling a studio. Behind the kitchen, I found a door sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. I peeled it away, the adhesive crumbling under my fingers, and pushed the door open. The smell of oil paint and turpentine wafted out, faint but unmistakable to someone who lived and breathed art like I did. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I gasped. Dozens of canvases, easels, paint-splattered drop cloths, brushes stiff with dried paint in mason jars. Victoria Belmont, Wall Street's most feared woman, had secretly painted. Landscapes, abstract portraits, memories captured in oils and acrylics. Each piece had small notations in the corners. Dates, locations, quotes. Paris, 1982, When the Heart Knows. Tuscany, 1990, William's Last Summer. Kyoto, 1995, After the Loss. I moved through the room in awe, touching the dried paint, recognizing technical elements that revealed a self-taught but dedicated hand. These weren't hobbyist paintings. These were chronicles of a life I had never known Victoria lived. Behind the largest canvas, an abstract explosion of blues and golds, I found another note. The combination is in the garden. Not all things die in winter. Garden? In a penthouse? I spent hours searching until I found it. A small greenhouse space off the dining room, now filled with the skeletal remains of plants long dead. Except for one, a small jade plant, somehow still alive despite decades of neglect, its thick leaves dusty but green. At its base was a small metal plaque with numbers, 1947-03. That night, as I huddled under the curtains for warmth, my mind raced with questions. Who was Victoria really? Why had she hidden this artistic side? And what was the combination for? The next morning, Chelsea, Nathaniel, and Robert arrived for their first weekly check-in. They looked genuinely surprised to find me still there. "Well, look. Who's becoming a squatter?" Chelsea said, wrinkling her nose at my appearance. I knew I looked terrible. Unwashed, exhausted, hungry. "Just checking that you haven't damaged company property," Nathaniel said, making notes on his tablet. "The company doesn't own this yet," I replied quietly. Robert snorted. "Just a matter of time, Harper. You can always quit now and save yourself the suffering. We might even find you a job in the mailroom." They inspected the main living areas, checking that I hadn't somehow cheated by ordering food or smuggling in supplies. They didn't enter the studio. They didn't even seem to know it existed. Before they left, Robert turned to me. "By the way, I've been appointed acting chairman in Victoria's absence. The board voted unanimously yesterday." "Congratulations," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "I'm already planning to sell this building," he continued. "Prime real estate wasted on sentiment. Victoria always was too attached to this place." After they left, I returned to the studio and sat among Victoria's paintings, drawing strength from this newfound connection to a woman I thought I had known. Whatever game Victoria was, playing from beyond the grave, I was determined to see it through. Not for the money, not even for her, but for the truth. Little did I know that what I would discover next would change everything I thought I knew about my aunt and about myself. By the end of the first week, I had established a routine of sorts. I'd wake at dawn when the first light filtered through the grimy windows. I'd collect water in various containers during brief rain showers, carefully rationing it for drinking and minimal washing. I'd explore one new section of the penthouse each day, searching for more clues. The combination numbers I'd found led me to an old safe hidden behind a painting in the library. Not one of Victoria's works, but an original Rothko that probably cost more than my entire life's earnings. Inside the safe, I found a leather-bound journal and a small brass key. That evening, I sat cross-legged on the floor of the studio, a makeshift candle, made from wax I'd scraped off old candelabras, providing just enough light to read Victoria's private thoughts. July 15th, 1982. William says I should stop hiding my paintings. He doesn't understand. Wall Street doesn't respect artists. They respect fear. If they knew I spent my nights painting instead of plotting, they'd never follow me. Power requires perception. Art requires vulnerability. I cannot be both the Victoria they need and the Victoria I am. I turned the pages carefully, moving through the decades of my aunt's secret life. March 3rd, 1990. The doctors say William has 6 months. How do you capture the essence of a dying? Love on canvas? I've tried 11 times. Burned them all. Nothing is right. December 24th, 1994. Harper came for Christmas. 5 years old and already has William's eye for color. She pointed to the exact spot in my landscape that wasn't working. I told her mother it was just a hobby. Another lie. My hands trembled. I remembered that Christmas, the last one before my parents' divorce. I remembered Victoria letting me use her special paints while the adults argued in the kitchen. I had no idea those moments had meant anything to her. January 18th, 2003. I'm closing the penthouse tomorrow. Too many ghosts. Too much truth on these walls. Chelsea thinks it's because of the memories of William, and I let her believe that. Easier than explaining that every room holds a piece of my fraudulent self. Board meeting tomorrow to announce expansion. They expect the shark of Wall Street, not a widow who paints her nightmares. The most recent entry was dated just 3 months before her death. April 30th, 2024. Finalize the will today. Winters thinks I'm mad. Perhaps I am. But if Harper is who I think she is, who I hope she is, she'll understand what I've left her. Not just assets, but answers. The question is whether she's strong enough to survive the asking. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. For 5 years, I'd believed Victoria had cut me off because I'd disappointed her by leaving business school. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. If she'd seen too much of herself in me and feared what that might mean. The brass key opened a small cabinet in the back of the studio. Inside were dozens of miniature paintings, no larger than playing cards, each depicting a different location around the world. Paris cafes, Japanese gardens, Italian coastlines. Places Victoria had visited, captured in tiny, perfect detail. And tucked behind them, a USB drive labeled simply, The Truth. I had no way to access it. No electricity, no computer. Another piece of the puzzle I couldn't yet solve. As I was replacing everything, I heard a noise from the main room. A deliberate footstep. Someone was in the penthouse. I froze, heart pounding. It was nearly midnight. The weekly check wasn't scheduled for 3 more days. Hello, Harper. The voice was familiar but unexpected. Thomas Winters, Victoria's lawyer. Mr. Winters? How did you get in? He stood awkwardly in, the doorway to the studio, looking out of place in his tailored suit. I have a key. Victoria gave it to me with instructions to check on you. Without the board's knowledge. That's against the rules, I said cautiously. Victoria made the rules, he replied with a small smile. And she made certain exceptions. May I? He gestured to a dusty chair. I nodded, still wary. I see you've found her. Sanctuary, he said, looking around at the paintings. She was quite talented. Did you know? I asked. About all of this? I've been Victoria's lawyer for 30 years. I knew many of her secrets. He sighed. The board is moving faster than anticipated. Robert has convinced the shareholders that you'll never last the 30 days. They're already drafting plans to liquidate most of Victoria's personal assets, including this building, especially this building. Robert has a buyer lined up, a hotel chain that wants to convert it to luxury suites. Can they do that before the 30 days are up? Legally, no. But they're preparing everything so they can move immediately if you fail. He hesitated. There's something else you should know. They're planning to check on you tomorrow, not Friday. They want to catch you off guard. Why are you telling me this? Winters removed his glasses, suddenly looking older and very tired. Because Victoria was more than a client to me, and because she believed in you, even when you thought she didn't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. She asked me to give you this on day 10. Since they're coming tomorrow, I thought you should have it now. Inside was a protein bar, a small bottle of water, and a note. Halfway there. The strongest metals are forged in fire. Thank you, I whispered. I can't come again, Winters said, standing. It would risk everything. But remember, Victoria didn't just leave you a challenge. She left you weapons. After he left, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he'd said. Weapons. What weapons could possibly help me against 3 powerful executives who had the entire Belmont capital machine behind them? The answer came to me as dawn broke, illuminating Victoria's paintings in the soft morning light. The USB drive, the journal, the art itself. Victoria hadn't just left me her secrets. She'd left me her truth. And in the corporate world she'd inhabited, truth was the deadliest weapon of all. When Chelsea, Nathaniel, and Robert arrived unannounced the next morning, I was ready for them. I'd hidden the journal, the key, and the USB drive inside a hollowed-out art book in the library. I'd erased all signs that I'd discovered the studio. Still here? Chelsea looked almost disappointed. Though you've seen better days. It was true. After 10 days without proper food, water, or hygiene facilities, I looked half dead. My clothes hung loose, my hair was matted, and my hands were stained with dust and rust from trying to fix a leaking pipe. Just living the dream, I replied hoarsely. Robert walked around inspecting the place, his expensive shoes leaving prints in the dust. Found anything interesting? He asked too casually. Just rats and regrets, I said. Victoria didn't leave much behind. Nathaniel was typing something on his phone. The board is announcing quarterly earnings tomorrow. Robert will be presenting as acting chairman. Moving up in the world, I observed. Congratulations. You could still walk away now, Robert said, his tone almost friendly. We could arrange a small stipend, enough for a decent apartment, maybe a year of expenses while you figure things out. The offer was tempting. 10 days of near starvation and isolation had taken their toll. But I thought of Victoria's note. The strongest metals are forged in fire. I'll pass, I said. After they left, I returned to the studio and stared at Victoria's paintings. In one, a storm-tossed boat on violent seas, I noticed something I hadn't before. Tiny letters worked into the waves. BCHL, Belmont Capital Holdings, Limited. And suddenly, I understood at least part of what Victoria had been trying to tell me. These weren't just paintings. They were records, evidence. Each beautiful image contained hidden information about the company, the board, perhaps even the truth she referenced on the USB drive. I had 20 more days to decipher it all. And somehow, I needed to find a way to see what was on that drive. By day 15, I had lost track of myself. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with a determination that bordered on madness. I'd lost at least 10 pounds. My hands shook constantly from hunger and exhaustion. But I'd gained something too. Understanding. I'd spent hours studying Victoria's paintings, finding the hidden codes and messages worked into each one. Dates, initials, and sometimes coordinates that I carefully noted on scraps of paper I found in desk drawers. I was building a map of some kind, though to what destination, I wasn't yet sure. The weekly check-in brought a new level of psychological warfare. This time, Chelsea came alone. "Oh, Harper," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look terrible. Are you sure this is worth it?" "I'm fine," I croaked, my throat dry from rationing water. "You know," Chelsea said, perching on a dusty armchair, "Victoria and I were close, very close. She confided in me, especially toward the end." I said nothing, waiting. "She told me you were her greatest disappointment." Chelsea examined her. Manicure. That leaving business school was just the final straw. She'd been disappointed in you your entire life. The words stung, but I thought of the journal entries I'd read. Victoria's private thoughts about me had been complicated, but not hateful, not disappointed. She would have said that to you, I replied. It's what she wanted the world to see. Something flickered across Chelsea's face. Surprise, perhaps. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said quickly. Just that Victoria had a public image to maintain. Chelsea stood and wandered through the penthouse, casually opening drawers and cabinets. We found some interesting discrepancies in the company accounts, she said. Large sums transferred to offshore accounts over the past 20 years. Nathaniel thinks Victoria might have been embezzling from her own company. Now it was my turn to be surprised. That doesn't sound like her, doesn't it? The woman who abandoned this multi-million-dollar property to rot? Who cut off her only living relative? Victoria was nothing if not unpredictable. Chelsea paused at the door to the hallway that led to the studio. What's down there? Storage, I lied. I already checked. Just old furniture and broken appliances. Chelsea seemed to accept this. The board is voting tomorrow on Robert's proposal to begin liquidating Victoria's personal assets. Not the company holdings, of course. Those are still in limbo until your little experiment ends. But her cars, her vacation properties, her art collection. Can they do that? With proper authorization from the, acting chairman? Absolutely. Chelsea smiled. Unless, of course, you'd like to concede now. I thought about the USB drive hidden in the hollow book. I needed time and resources to access it. I'm staying, I said. After Chelsea left, I forced myself to eat the last of the canned food I'd found, a tin of sardines that was 5 years past its expiration date. Then I went back to work on the, paintings. 3 days later, I had my breakthrough. One of the miniature paintings depicted a marina in Monaco. Hidden in the waves were the initials RFK, Robert Frederick Kinsey, my aunt's golden boy, and a date from 3 years ago. Another painting of the same location, from a different angle, contained different initials. CV for Chelsea Voss. Both paintings had tiny red flags worked into the E. Masts of the boats. Red flags. Warnings. I pulled out all the miniatures with red flags and arranged them chronologically. They told a story. Meetings, transactions, property transfers, all involving Robert, Chelsea, and sometimes Nathaniel, dating back 15 years. Victoria hadn't just been painting. She'd been documenting. The next day, I had an unexpected visitor. Winters had warned me he couldn't return, so I was surprised to hear the lock turn well after midnight. I grabbed the fireplace poker and waited in the shadows. The figure that entered wasn't Winters or Chelsea or any of the board members. It was Elena Martinez, Victoria's longtime executive assistant. Harper, she called softly. Are you here? I stepped out cautiously. Elena, what are you doing here? She jumped, startled. Thank God, I wasn't sure you'd still be here. She looked around nervously. I can't stay long. They don't know I have a key. Why are you here? Elena pulled a small package from her coat. Victoria left this with me years ago, said if anything happened to her and if you lasted more than 2 weeks in this place, I should bring it to you. Inside the package was a portable power bank, fully charged, and a small adapter that would fit the USB drive. There's something else, Elena said. The board meeting today. They voted to start legal proceedings challenging Victoria's will. Robert's claiming she wasn't of sound mind when she wrote it. Can they do that? They've hired 3 psychiatric experts to testify that her behavior in the final year, including this penthouse challenge, was evidence of mental decline. Elena hesitated. There's one more thing. They've scheduled an interview with the Wall Street Journal. They're going to paint you as an opportunist who abandoned Victoria and now wants her fortune. My hands clenched into fists. That's not true. I know, Elena said softly. I worked with Victoria for 20 years. She changed after you left Wharton. Became more private. Started working from home more often. She glanced toward the hallway. She was painting, wasn't she? I nodded slowly. You knew? I suspected. She had paint under her fingernails sometimes. Elena smiled sadly. I have to go. They track my phone. If they knew I was here... After she left, I connected the USB drive to the power bank. The screen flickered to life, revealing a single folder labeled Insurance. Inside were hundreds of files. Financial records, emails, photos, and audio recordings. Victoria had been collecting evidence for years. Evidence of corporate espionage, insider trading, and systematic embezzlement. All pointing to Robert, Chelsea, and Nathaniel. They hadn't just been planning to take over after Victoria's death. They'd been stealing from the company, for years. And Victoria had known. She'd documented everything, hidden in plain sight within her art. Now I understood the true purpose of my 30-day ordeal. Victoria hadn't just been testing my resilience. She'd been buying time for the truth to emerge. By day 20, I was barely functioning. Hunger had become a constant companion, gnawing at me from the inside. I'd found ways to collect rainwater from a small leak in the roof, but it wasn't enough. My body was consuming itself, and my mind was beginning to play tricks. Sometimes I'd hear Victoria's voice, clear as day, telling me to keep going. What kept me sane was the work. I spent hours poring over the files on the USB drive, learning the extent of the board's betrayal. Robert had been systematically redirecting company investments to his own shell corporations for over a decade. Chelsea had been selling insider information to competitors. Nathaniel had falsified legal documents to cover their tracks, and Victoria had recorded it all, quietly, methodically, over years. The question that haunted me was, why hadn't she exposed them while she was alive? The evidence was damning. She could have fired them all, pressed charges, destroyed their careers with a single press conference. The answer came to me on day 23, as I sat shivering in the studio, surrounded by her paintings. Victoria hadn't just been collecting evidence against individuals. She had been mapping out systemic corruption that reached far beyond Belmont Capital, to major Wall Street firms, government officials, even judges. Taking down her own board would have triggered a financial collapse that would have hurt thousands of innocent people, employees, small investors, pension funds that relied on Belmont Capital's stability. She needed someone who could execute a more surgical approach, someone who understood both the business world and the human cost of corporate greed, someone who would make the right choice when faced with the power to destroy or to transform. She needed me. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Victoria hadn't sent me into this abandoned penthouse as punishment. She'd sent me here to prepare me, to strip away everything except my core principles, to ensure I understood the value of what she was entrusting me with. When Chelsea arrived for the next weekly check-in, she came alone again. She looked tense, her usual smooth confidence replaced by a brittle nervousness. "You don't look well," she observed, keeping her distance as if my condition might be contagious. I must have been a frightening sight. Skeletal, filthy, eyes burning with determination despite my physical deterioration. "I'm fine," I rasped. "Just 7 more days." She paced the living room. "The challenge was Victoria's idea of a joke, you know. She never thought you'd last this long. And yet, here I am." "The board meeting yesterday was interesting," Chelsea continued, examining her manicure in what I now recognized as a tell when she was lying. "We reviewed some old transactions that Victoria had flagged, discrepancies in the offshore accounts." My pulse quickened. They knew. They'd found something that made them suspicious. "Sounds fascinating," I said dryly. "Robert thinks Victoria was hiding money from the company, from the IRS." Chelsea watched me carefully. "If that's true, and if you inherit, well, that would make you party to tax fraud. Serious jail time." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "A friendly warning. If you find anything unusual during your, stay here. It would be in your best interest to bring it to us before the authorities." She smiled thinly. "We can protect you, Harper. Victoria can't. Not anymore." After she left, I returned to the USB files with renewed urgency. They were getting nervous. They knew Victoria had evidence, but they didn't know what specifically or where she had kept it. They were trying to scare me into revealing what I'd found. 7 more days. I just needed to hold out for 7 more days. On day 25, I had an unexpected breakthrough. Among Victoria's miniature paintings was one of a lighthouse on a rocky Maine coast. Unlike the others, this one had no hidden codes or initials, but something about it called to me. I examined it closely and noticed that the lighthouse itself had an unusual feature, a small balcony that didn't match any lighthouse I'd ever seen. It wasn't a real lighthouse, it was a safe house. In Victoria's journal, she'd mentioned a property in Maine several times. "My true sanctuary," she'd called it. A place no one at Belmont Capital knew about, purchased through a separate trust, not connected to her public identity. I carefully removed the painting from its frame and found what I was looking for: a deed and an address, hidden behind the canvas. A property in her real name. Victoria Harper, not Victoria Belmont. She'd taken our family name, my name, for her secret identity. Along with the deed was a key and another note. "When the time comes, this is where the truth belongs. Not in their hands, not in the system, in the light." I realized what Victoria had done. She hadn't just been documenting the corruption, she'd been creating a parallel life, a separate identity, a place where the truth could be protected until the right moment. The lighthouse wasn't just a safe house, it was a beacon. 5 more days. I just needed to last 5 more days. But on day 26, everything changed. The door to the penthouse burst open without warning. Robert strode in, followed by 2 security guards I recognized from the Belmont Capitol lobby. "Search everything," he ordered. "Every room, every drawer, every hiding place." I stood in the center of the living room, too weak to run, too determined to cower. "What's going on?" "Elena Martinez was fired yesterday," Robert said coldly. "She admitted to visiting you, bringing you supplies. That's a violation of the terms." "She didn't bring me food," I protested. "Just a power bank." Robert's eyes narrowed. "A power bank? For what device exactly?" I realized my mistake too late. Robert turned to the guards. "Find whatever electronic device she has. She's been communicating with someone outside." One of the guards headed straight for the library, where I'd been keeping the USB drive. Had they been watching me somehow? Did they know where I'd hidden it? "This is still my aunt's property," I said as firmly as I could. "You have no right to search it." "Actually, as acting chairman, I have every right." Robert smiled coldly. "And as of this morning, the board has voted to challenge Victoria's will on grounds of mental incompetence. The 30-day challenge is officially suspended, pending legal review." "You can't do that." "We already have. 3 psychiatric experts have signed affidavits stating that Victoria's behavior in her final months showed clear signs of paranoid delusions. This ridiculous challenge is Exhibit A." He gestured around the decaying penthouse. "No sane person would subject their niece to this, or make a trillion-dollar company's future dependent on such a stunt." The guard returned from the library holding the hollow book where I'd hidden the USB drive. "Sir, you should see this." Fear gripped me. If they found the USB drive with all the evidence Victoria had collected, it would disappear forever. They would destroy it, along with any chance I had of fulfilling Victoria's final request. But to my surprise, the guard wasn't holding the USB drive. He was holding Victoria's journal. "It's her private diary," the guard said, "full of, well, you should read it yourself." Robert snatched the journal and began flipping through the pages, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion to something like fear. "Where's the rest?" he demanded, turning to me. "Where are the files?" I stayed silent, my mind racing. They hadn't found the USB drive. Yet. It must have fallen deeper into the hollow book. Or perhaps I'd moved it to a different hiding place in my exhaustion and forgotten. "Take her downstairs," Robert ordered the guards. "This challenge is over. Ms. Belmont has violated the terms by communicating with outsiders and using electronic devices." As the guards moved toward me, I felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't fail now. Not when I was so close. Not when I finally understood what Victoria had been preparing me for. "If you touch me," I said with as much strength as I could muster, "I will call the Wall Street Journal myself. I'll tell them exactly why you're so desperate to search this penthouse. What you're really looking for." Robert froze. "You're bluffing. You have no proof of anything." "Don't I?" I met his gaze. Steadily. "Victoria left me more than just this challenge, Robert. She left me the truth. All of it. And if anything happens to me, if this challenge is terminated prematurely, that truth goes public. Immediately." It was my turn to bluff. I had no way to ensure the evidence would be released if something happened to me. But Robert didn't know that. For a long moment, we stood in silence, measuring each other. Then Robert nodded to the guards. "Leave us." After they departed, he turned back to me. "What do you want?" 4 more days, I said. "Honor the original agreement. 30 days. Then I walk out of here, and we all find out what Victoria really intended." Robert studied me, calculation in his eyes. "And if I refuse? Then we both lose," I said simply. "Because whatever Victoria left me, it won't just destroy you. It will destroy Belmont Capital. Is that what you want? To be chairman of nothing?" Another long silence. Then Robert tossed Victoria's journal onto a dusty table. 4 days. Not a minute more. And when you leave, you'd better have nothing but the clothes on your back, or the deal is void." After he left, I collapsed onto the floor, shaking with exhaustion and relief. I had bought myself time, but at a cost. They now knew I had found something important. They would be watching the penthouse even more closely. I needed to get the USB drive out somehow, to ensure Victoria's evidence reached the right hands, even if I couldn't complete the challenge. As darkness fell on my 26th night in the penthouse, I made a decision. The truth was more important than the inheritance. Victoria's legacy was more important than my pride. I would find a way to get the USB drive to Winters, even if it meant forfeiting everything else. The last 4 days of my stay in Victoria's penthouse were a delicate dance of deception and determination. I knew Robert would have the building watched, probably the exits, certainly the main entrance. I needed to find a way to get the USB drive out without being caught. On the morning of day 27, I began my performance. I moved slowly through the main rooms, making enough noise to be noticed by anyone watching. I searched through cabinets and drawers I'd already examined weeks ago, muttering to myself, playing the part of someone desperate to find something hidden. In reality, I'd already secured the USB drive in the one place they wouldn't think to look, sewn into the hem of the grimy blazer I'd been wearing since day one, the blazer they expected me to walk out in, the one piece of clothing they couldn't deny me without creating a public scandal. That afternoon, I heard voices in the hallway outside the penthouse. Pressing my ear to the door, I could make out Robert speaking to someone. Just need to keep eyes on the building until Friday. If she tries to leave early or pass anything to anyone, stop her. Otherwise, let her walk out as planned. And then, another voice asked, then we escort her to the board meeting, present the psychiatric evidence, and this whole farce ends. Victoria's final delusion dies with it. Their footsteps retreated down the hall. I returned to the studio and sat among Victoria's paintings, thinking. I had expected them to challenge the will, but I hadn't anticipated the psychiatric angle. They were going to claim Victoria was mentally ill when she wrote the will, making the entire challenge invalid regardless of whether I completed it. I needed allies. I needed a plan for what happened after I walked out. On day 28, I made a desperate gamble. Using a small piece of charcoal from Victoria's art supplies, I wrote a message on a blank canvas. Winters, Lighthouse, Maine, USB. I placed the canvas facing the window of the studio, angled so it could be seen from the building across the street but not from inside the penthouse. Then I draped one of Victoria's old sheets over it, making it look like just another covered painting. If Elena or Winters were watching the building, and I had to believe they were, they might see it. They might understand. It was a risk. If Robert's people saw it first, they'd know I had hidden evidence and where I planned to send it. But I was running out of options and time. Day 29 brought another surprise. A note slipped under the door in the middle of the night. 2 words in. Handwriting I didn't recognize. We're ready. No signature. No explanation. Just that simple assurance that someone out there was prepared for what came next. I spent my final night in the penthouse saying goodbye to Victoria. Not to her physical presence. She had never returned to this place after sealing it up, but to the woman I had discovered through her journals, her paintings, her hidden life. I understand now, I whispered to a self-portrait she had painted, hidden in the back of the studio. In it, she looked younger, softer, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I had never seen in real life. I understand why you couldn't be both Victorias at once. Why you had to choose. I thought about the choices that awaited me outside these walls. The power I would soon hold. Not just financial power, but the power of truth. The power to destroy careers, to upend lives, to transform a company from the inside out. Victoria had faced those same choices. She had chosen to build her evidence slowly, carefully, protecting the innocent while documenting the guilty. She had chosen to create a plan that would minimize collateral damage. Could I do the same? Did I have her strength, her patience, her strategic mind? Morning broke on day 30, sunlight filtering through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. I had survived. Against all expectations, theirs and, honestly, my own. I had made it through 30 days in Victoria's abandoned penthouse with no money, no phone, and no outside help. At least none that could be proven. I washed my face with the last of my collected rainwater. I smoothed my filthy clothes as best I could. I ran fingers through my matted hair. Then I waited. At precisely noon, the lock turned. The door swung open to reveal Chelsea, Nathaniel, and Robert, flanked by 2 security guards and, surprisingly, Mr. Winters. 30 days, I said simply. As agreed. Indeed. Winters nodded, checking his watch. The terms of Victoria's will have been satisfied. Ms. Harper may now leave the premises and proceed directly to Belmont Capital for the reading of the full will. Robert's expression was tightly controlled, after which the board will present its legal challenge. One step at a time, Mr. Finch, Winters said mildly. Chelsea was staring at me with undisguised revulsion. You need to shower before appearing at the company. We can't have you looking like this in front of the shareholders. The will specified that Harper must proceed directly from the penthouse to the board meeting. Winters corrected. Her appearance is a testament to her commitment to honoring Victoria's wishes. As I stepped out of the penthouse for the first time in 30 days, the hallway seemed impossibly bright, the air impossibly fresh. My legs were weak, my body depleted, but my mind was clear and focused. The elevator ride down was silent and tense. In the lobby, I was startled to see a small crowd gathered. Employees from Belmont Capital, a few reporters, and standing quietly in the back, Elena Martinez. Our eyes met briefly. She gave a slight nod. The message had been received. Outside, a sleek black car waited. As I moved toward it, Robert placed a hand on my arm. "Whatever you think you know," he said quietly. "Whatever you think you found in there, it won't matter." Victoria was sick, delusional. The board has unanimous support for our position. I looked at his hand until he removed it. "We'll see," I said. The drive to Belmont Capital's headquarters took less than 15 minutes, but it felt like entering another world. The gleaming tower of steel and glass stood in stark contrast to the decaying grandeur of Victoria's penthouse. Here was the public face of her empire. Sleek, modern, imposing. In the lobby, employees stopped and stared as I passed, whispers following in my wake. I must have been a shocking sight, emaciated, filthy, yet walking with my head high, through the marble-floored atrium of one of the most prestigious financial firms in the country. The boardroom was on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The long table was already filled with board members and major shareholders, all watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust as I entered. At the head of the table, Robert took his seat, gesturing for me to sit at the opposite end. Chelsea and Nathaniel flanked him, a united front against the interloper. Winters cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here for the reading of Victoria Belmont's final will and testament. As you know, one condition has already been met. Ms. Harper has successfully completed 30 days in Ms. Belmont's Upper East Side penthouse with no money, no phone, and no outside contact. A condition we intend to challenge," Nathaniel interjected smoothly. "We have substantial evidence that Victoria was not of sound mind when she drafted these unusual terms." "That matter will be addressed in due course," Winters replied. "For now, we proceed with the reading." He opened a leather portfolio and removed a sealed envelope. "This is the, complete will, which Victoria instructed me to open only upon completion of the 30-day challenge." As Winters broke the seal, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I had done what Victoria asked. I had survived. I had discovered her truth. And most importantly, I had understood her purpose. The room fell silent as Winters began to read. "I, Victoria Eleanor Belmont." Winters read from the document. "Being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my final wishes." The room was utterly silent as he continued. "To my niece, Harper Belmont, I leave my personal fortune in its entirety, including my properties, investments held under my legal name, and all assets not directly tied to Belmont Capital Holdings. This includes my art collection, which I trust she will appreciate more than most." Robert leaned forward. "That's it? Her personal assets? The company holdings still transfer to the board?" Winters held up a hand. "There is more." He turned the page. "Regarding Belmont Capital Holdings, I hereby exercise my controlling interest to restructure the organization as follows. Harper Belmont is to be installed as chairperson of the newly formed Ethics Committee, with authority to investigate and rectify any improprieties within the company." Murmurs broke out around the table. Chelsea's face had gone pale. "Furthermore," Winters continued, "I direct that the enclosed evidence be submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, and the New York Attorney General's office for review and appropriate action." Winters reached into the envelope and withdrew a small flash drive, identical to the one hidden in my blazer hem. Robert shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. Victoria was clearly delusional when she wrote this. We have medical experts who will testify." "I anticipated your response, Mr. Finch," Winters said calmly. "Victoria did as well. That's why she included this." He produced a sealed letter. "This is a psychiatric evaluation performed by Dr. Eleanor Richards, Chief of Psychiatry at Mount Sinai, conducted 2 weeks before Victoria's death. It confirms her complete mental competence and sound judgment." "She was dying," Nathaniel cut in. "She must have known about the heart condition. She wasn't thinking clearly." "On the contrary," Winters replied. Victoria's cardiac arrest was sudden and unpredicted. Her medical records, also included here, show no prior indication of heart disease. She was, however, concerned about threats to her life, which is why she took these precautions. The room fell silent again. Threats? One of the shareholders asked. What threats? I spoke for the first time since entering the boardroom. Victoria discovered systematic embezzlement within Belmont. Capital, funds diverted to offshore accounts, insider trading, fabricated reports to shareholders. My voice, though weak from disuse, carried clearly across the silent room. She spent years documenting it all. Ridiculous, Robert scoffed. If she had evidence of wrongdoing, why not come forward while she was alive? Why this elaborate charade? Because the corruption extends beyond this room, I answered, meeting his gaze steadily. To regulators who were bribed, to judges who were compromised, to partners who were complicit. She needed someone outside the system to bring the truth to light, someone who couldn't be bought or threatened. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of the board members and shareholders. She needed someone who understood both worlds, finance and art. Someone who could see patterns, connections that others missed. Someone who would make the right choice when given the power to destroy or transform. And you think that's you? Chelsea asked incredulously. A failed business student who couldn't hack it at Wharton? Who's been painting pet portraits in Brooklyn for the past 5 years? I smiled faintly. Victoria thought so. That's why she tested me. Not just to see if I could survive, but to see what kind of person I would be when stripped of everything except my principles. Winters nodded. The final section of the will addresses this specifically. He continued reading. If Harper successfully completes the 30-day challenge, it will demonstrate not only her resilience, but her commitment to truth. The penthouse contains evidence that only someone with integrity would find, and only someone with wisdom would understand how to use. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is absurd. We don't have to listen to this. He turned to the shareholders. We'll challenge this in court. I'm afraid that would be unwise, Mr. Finch, Winters interrupted. Victoria instructed me to deliver copies of her evidence to the authorities immediately upon the completion of Harper's challenge, regardless of the board's response today. Those deliveries were made this morning. The room erupted in chaos. Shareholders demanded explanations. Board members conferred urgently with each other. Nathaniel was frantically typing on his phone. Above the din, a security guard entered and approached Robert. Sir, there are federal agents in the lobby. They're asking for you, Ms. Voss, and Mr. Drake. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness. Victoria had tried to build something meaningful with Belmont Capital. These people had corrupted it from within, betraying not just her, but everyone who had trusted them with their investments, their pensions, their futures. It doesn't have to end this way, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the commotion. Victoria didn't want to destroy Belmont Capital. She wanted to save it. The room gradually quieted. The ethics committee she established isn't just about punishment. It's about redemption, about creating a company that operates with transparency and integrity. I looked around at the shocked faces. Victoria gave me the power to decide who stays and who goes, who deserves a second chance. And you expect us to believe you won't use that power for revenge? Robert asked bitterly. I'm not interested in revenge, I replied honestly. I'm interested in justice and in honoring what Victoria built. As federal agents entered the boardroom, the meeting dissolved into a flurry of legal proceedings. Robert, Chelsea, and Nathaniel were escorted out for questioning. Several shareholders immediately announced their intention to sell their stakes. Others demanded emergency meetings to discuss the company's future. Through it all, I remained seated at the end of the table, too exhausted to move, trying to absorb the enormity of what had just happened. Winters approached and sat beside me. You did well, he said quietly. Victoria would be proud. Did she know? I asked. That I would find everything? That I would understand? She hoped, he replied. She believed in you more than you know. What happens now? Now, he said, standing and offering me his hand. You go home, rest, recover. There will be time enough for decisions later. As we left the boardroom, Elena was waiting in the hallway. The lighthouse is secure, she said simply. Everything is where it should be. I nodded, grateful beyond words. Thank you for everything. Outside the Belmont Capitol building, reporters had begun to gather, alerted by the unusual presence of federal agents. Winters guided me to a side exit where a car was waiting. The penthouse has been opened, he told me. Your aunt's actual residence, not The abandoned one is prepared for you. I took the liberty of having food delivered. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the gleaming tower of Belmont Capital. My inheritance wasn't just wealth or power. It was responsibility. The responsibility to do what Victoria couldn't, to transform her legacy into something worthy of her vision. I hadn't sought this role. I hadn't wanted it. But sitting in that car, watching the city streets pass by, I knew I had been preparing for it my entire life. Victoria had seen in me something I hadn't seen in myself. Now, it was time to prove her right. 3 months later, I stood in the light-filled studio of Victoria's main lighthouse, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. My body had recovered from the 30-day ordeal, though sometimes I still woke. In the night, disoriented, thinking I was back in that dust-filled penthouse. The aftermath of what the press had dubbed the Belmont Revelation had been intense. Robert, Chelsea, and Nathaniel faced federal charges for securities fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy. Several regulatory officials had been implicated in the scandal. The stock price of Belmont Capital had plummeted initially, then stabilized as the new leadership team, with me as reluctant figurehead, implemented Victoria's vision for reform. I'd moved into Victoria's actual New York residence, a warm, art-filled apartment overlooking Central Park that couldn't have been more different from the abandoned penthouse. There, I discovered more of her secrets. Journals dating back decades, correspondence with artists around the world, and most surprisingly, a collection of my own artwork that she had secretly purchased through galleries under different names. She had never stopped watching over me, even when I thought she had cut me out of her life. The lighthouse in Maine had become my sanctuary, just as it had been hers. Here, among her paints and canvases, I felt closest to the Victoria few had known. The artist, the dreamer, the woman who had lived a double life out of necessity rather than choice. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Elena entered, carrying a tray with coffee and pastries. "The board members will be arriving at noon," she reminded me. "The helicopter is scheduled for 10 a.m. I nodded, taking the coffee gratefully. "Thank you. Not just for this, for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Elena smiled. Victoria would be pleased. The company is changing, just as she hoped. The ethics committee I now chaired had been systematically reviewing every aspect of Belmont Capital's operations, rooting out corruption, implementing new transparency protocols, and most importantly, changing the culture from within. It hadn't been easy. Some longtime employees had resisted the changes. Several major clients had withdrawn their business, but others had been drawn to the company's new direction, impressed by our commitment to ethical investing and corporate responsibility. "There's something else," Elena said, hesitating. "A letter came from Robert's attorney. He's offering to provide additional evidence against external conspirators in exchange for leniency." I sighed. Even from jail, Robert was still playing angles, still looking for leverage. "Forward it to the legal team. Let them handle it. And there's been another request for an interview. The Wall Street Journal. They want your side of the story." "Decline," I said automatically. I had refused all interview requests, letting the evidence and the legal proceedings speak for themselves. The truth didn't need my narration. After Elena left, I returned to the painting I had been working on, a portrait of Victoria based on photographs and memory, but influenced by what I now knew of her inner life. In it, she stood at this very window looking out at the ocean, paintbrush in hand, her expression serene in a way I had rarely seen in life. At noon, the new board members arrived. A diverse group of financial experts, ethicists, and community leaders I had helped select to replace those implicated in the scandal. We gathered in the lighthouse's sunny dining room, the formal boardroom setting replaced by a round table overlooking the sea. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know Maine is a journey for most of you, but I wanted you to see this place, to understand what it represents." I explained how Victoria had created this sanctuary separate from her public identity, how she had pursued her passion for art in secret while building one of Wall Street's most powerful firms. "Belmont Capital was founded on Victoria's financial genius," I said, "but it lost its way when profit became more important than purpose. Our job now is to restore that balance, to create a company that generates wealth not just for shareholders, but for the communities we serve." The discussion that followed was thoughtful and sometimes contentious. These were strong-minded individuals with different perspectives on how to move forward, but they shared a commitment to the principles Victoria had outlined in her final instructions: integrity, transparency, and responsibility. By late afternoon, we had finalized plans for the company's reorganization. As the board members departed for their helicopter ride back to New York, I remained at the lighthouse, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Winters joined me on the deck, his usual formal demeanor softened by the informal setting. A productive meeting, he observed. Victoria would approve. Would she? I wondered aloud. Sometimes I think I know what she wanted, and other times, she wanted you to make the company your own, Winters said simply. Not to recreate her vision exactly, but to build on it, to see what she couldn't see. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. The challenge. The 30 days in the penthouse. Was it really necessary? Couldn't she have just left me her evidence? Explained everything in a letter? Winters considered this. Victoria believed that true understanding comes through experience, not explanation. She wanted you to know, in your body, in your spirit, what it means to stand alone, what it means to hold to your principles when everything is taken away. She nearly killed me, I said, but without bitterness. She made you stronger, he countered, strong enough to face what came after. That night, after Winters had gone, I returned to the studio and finished Victoria's portrait. As I added the final brushstrokes, I felt a sense of completion. Not just of the painting, but of a journey that had begun that day when her lawyer had appeared at my Brooklyn apartments with an impossible challenge. The woman I had known as Aunt Victoria, imperious, demanding, seemingly cold, had been just one facet of a complex, passionate person who had compartmentalized her life out of necessity. The businesswoman, the artist, the mentor, the visionary. I understood now why she had pushed me so hard, why she had seemed disappointed when I left business school. It wasn't that she thought art was beneath me. It was that she saw in me the potential to be what she could not. Whole. Integrated. True to all parts of myself without having to hide any of them. The next morning, I made a decision. I called Elena. The Wall Street Journal interview, I said. Set it up. But here, at the lighthouse. And tell them I want to discuss Victoria's art collection and the new Belmont Foundation for the Arts. It was time to bring Victoria's two worlds together, the financial empire and the artistic soul. Time to create something new from what she had built and what she had hidden. Time to honor her legacy by living mine. As I looked out at the lighthouse beams sweeping across the darkening water, I thought about the power of light, how it reveals, how it guides, how it transforms. Victoria had been my light, even when I couldn't see it. Now it was my turn to carry that light forward, to illuminate paths she had only begun to explore. Not as Victoria Belmont's niece or heir, but as Harper Belmont. Artist, businesswoman, keeper of truth, the person she had always believed I could be.